Good morning, everybody. Who's ready to fight corruption? Okay, great. Great. Who's ready to see a film? Great. Okay. I heard somebody said nice movie. Have you seen it before? No? Okay. But I'm happy you trust me. That's good. You trust me that I picked a good movie. Okay. Well, I have a couple questions for you. I want to get a feel of what you think about the topic of corruption and the role that citizens play in fighting corruption. So, we don't need to have like very serious, thought out answers. Just like give me your gut reaction when you hear the question. Raise your hand if corruption is a major problem in your country. Raise your two hands. Okay. 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 Are people in your country really engaged, really activated, really motivated, really hopeful about fighting corruption? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Good. So a few affirmative answers. Very good. That's good to see. But a lot of negative answers, right? Not too many. Okay.
Because we started fighting corruption, so we are hopeful.
Yeah.
You started something, so you must be hopeful.
Exactly. Good point. And you're hopeful too, or people are motivated?
People are motivated because the government doesn't care.
The government doesn't care. Yeah. So they're okay. Well, maybe after this session, you'll get some other ideas about how to approach fighting corruption. And
Yes.
yes.
Yes, in Burkina we push a lot to see change.
Yeah.
Now, yes, it's obvious that we have some concrete achievements, but we are now facing a gap between small corruption and large corruption. So it's.
So do you have both at the same time, or there's more of one versus the other?
Yes. The small one is we try to change a lot of things for fighting small corruption, but the grand corruption, it's a big issue.
It's a big issue. It's there. Okay. Yeah. That happens in a lot of countries. Let me ask you another question. What kinds of corruption are particularly destructive in your country? And you answered one for Burkina Faso. Just quick, four people, what kinds of corruption are particularly destructive in your country? Third row from the bottom. Ladies, one hand up. Let me see. Just give me an example. Judicial system. Okay, great. Thank you. Yes?
Yeah, in the institutional system, in the parliament.
In the parliament. Okay, so the parliament, political parties, politicians. Thank you. Two hands here. Fikiri.
Yes, in the police.
Police. Okay. Security. Hillary?
Financial institutions.
Financial institutions? What do you mean by that? You mean banks or?
Yeah. When I mean financial institutions, I mean institutions set up by the government to organize the finances in the country, including banks.
Including banks. Okay, thank you. Okay, I see 3 people have burning want also. So, Chaminda? Oh, gift giving. So would you consider, okay, so that's an interesting thing. That's something that we could get into as a conversation later. Gift giving versus bribery. Because and Mete, you had your hand up?
Yeah, money
Money laundering.
Army and Marine.
Pardon?
Marine and the Army are involved in corruption.
Okay, okay. Military, okay. One more, okay, thank you. And, you don't have your name tag. I mean, I wanted to call out your name. Arnab, okay.
So in the educational institutions,
Educational institutions.
that affects the quality of human resources.
Okay, that's a good one too. Okay. Some of them are on the list, huh? Not that we'll go out, so raise your hand if environment, if some of you feel that environment destruction and whatever is in corruption. Yeah? Okay. I think you've covered almost everything else. Healthcare? How about healthcare? That's a big one? Okay.
Elections.
Elections. So the political processes themselves. Yeah. So I should put that, okay, political parties system, and I should put here / political processes. So you've outlined like really what a lot of citizen-based grassroots campaigns, movements, and local community initiatives are tackling around the world. So it's like what Oliver Kaplan said in his session, that there's so much happening and we just haven't been seeing it. And that's the same thing with our field of corruption, that so much is happening on the ground in which citizens are the protagonists, and we just don't see it. Partially because sometimes when people may not necessarily call themselves an anti-corruption effort. So just like Oliver Kaplan was talking, I don't know that all the communities that he described were going around saying, we are officially a nonviolent peace community fighting armed non-state or state actors. No, they're just doing it. And that's the same with this. People are just doing it. They're not worried about labels, about what they are, if they're anti-corruption or for poverty or for this or for that. They're just tackling the problem. So that's why we don't hear about it. But the more we start to look and the more we know what to look for, the more we see that it's like there's an explosion around the world. And maybe there always has been and we didn't see it. But at least now when one sees it, it's just happening everywhere, in every part of the world, even finally at last in the United States, of all places. Because when I started my research in 2009, 2010, I couldn't find anything happening in the US, to my great disappointment. So let me ask you one more question. Is there any kind of corruption that particularly angers people in your country? Just makes them feel very angry or offended, or even sometimes collectively offended, like as a society offended by a particular kind of corruption? I see people raising their hands. Okay. Francis in the back, yeah?
Yes, there's one particular one in health.
In health?
Yeah, just recently our cancer machine broke down and so many patients were actually at that point, and we had to fly to Kenya, which was very expensive. So if you come to think of it, that you have a government that is not thinking of its healthcare system, and people have to spend extra amounts of money to go to neighboring countries or even abroad, you know, it just doesn't sit well with the system.
People were very upset. So it was almost symptomatic of something even larger in the society. It was not the fact that the machine broke and perhaps nobody was there to repair it, but the fact that it epitomized so many other problems in the society related to the government, or it could be some other factor. Leonora, and then we'll go to this side. Leonora, Anastasia, and then we'll go to this side of the room. Yes.
Justice, like
Yeah.
prosecutors and judge system is not working. I mean, how can we put these people in prison? How can we, this is the biggest problem that ever happened.
So, and people are very people are offended and upset about it. Okay. Thank you. Anastasia.
I'm absolutely agree with this point. And also in my country, it's young people when they try to find a job, it's possible without connection and money.
Yeah, yeah. And that makes, and that, does, do you think, is it, does that also make, for example, young people are very upset about it. Do you feel that also that their families are very upset about it? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay, good examples. Fahad and then Eric. Yes.
Well, in Kenya, the post-election violence
Yes.
that 2007 can be attributed to the inequality of the distribution of resources, like land. For example, in Coast Province, you know, we who stay there for ages don't own land, but people who come from other areas who come there, they have the certificates to show that these lands are theirs. So the inequality of distribution and land ownership is very, very endemic to us. So people are very rowdy about it, and they can even kill to send the message home.
And how does corruption play into that? What's the link?
The link is those who have the cash, those who belong to a certain community, have access to that land,
I see.
have access to the certificate of ownership to that land.
So the corruption enables that to happen.
Indeed.
Okay. So corruption is often an enabler of these other negative outcomes for people that are very harmful to them. Eric?
So in Hungary, the
Yes.
shadowest area of corruption is the state-run projects.
Ah.
Construction projects, especially which deal with the subsidies coming from the EU
Oh,
and going through lots of different hands, companies, offshore companies, etc. And another thing is the judiciary system, which protects all the politicians at all costs, but only them.
Only them. So it's structured to serve them, not the people, not the society. Hillary and then Hassan, and then we'll move along. Yes?
As regards financial corruption in the country, it's really angers people because so many times a lot of funds are unaccounted for. During the last president regime, during the last president's time, the Central Bank of Nigeria, the governor, wrote a letter leaked by the press, wrote it to the president and alleged that the Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation is unable to account for over $12 billion when he came after auditing the accounts and everything. And it was a serious scandal. And so many times billions are allocated for cleanups, for various projects, and they just go missing. And a lot of institutions, especially public institutions, because they feel these government money, it's not anyone's money. So people just keep stealing and stealing and no accountability.
And people are upset about that. So on the one hand, in most of the countries represented here, you would say on the one hand, people were not really organized yet or really motivated or hopeful to actually do something to tackle these problems. But on the other hand, you're saying that there are a lot of problems that can be linked or exacerbated linked to or exacerbated by corruption, and people are feeling it in their everyday lives or they're angry about it. So that's an interesting juxtaposition. So, and that's something to think about during this session, because the session is about how people have moved beyond that to actually do something about it. Yes? Oh, we have to move on. Okay. Hussein, and then, okay, and then Jean, and then we'll move on.
No,
Okay.
I just wanted to say
Yes.
there's also petty corruption that
Yes.
affects the people directly,
Yeah.
particularly in Kenya with the police. You just get arrested, the police says, give me $2, and if you say you don't have, or you say you have and you don't want to give, then they, put something on you, and then you get arrested and you put in. So there's also corruption that affects the individual directly, and not necessarily the grand corruption that boils down to.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point too. Yeah. So that, and that's like that comes up here. Police is something I've heard people talk about across the world, from Africa all the way to Russia. That's something that really is upsetting to people. So Jean, and then Nena, and then Hassan. Okay. No, you had a chance. Sorry. No, you had a chance. You had a chance? No? You had Jean, and then Nena, and then we'll move on. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
I might as well be taking some of the words that have been used, but
Yeah.
I would like to make in the point of the DRC is
Yeah.
like corruption has been like now institutionalized.
Uh-huh.
It have affected people. People are against it, but it's like now normalized. It means like if people have understood like if you don't do this, you'll not get anything. And if you come like fighting against corruption, you are seen as a person who's now abnormal.
Okay, so how many people feel that that's the situation in their countries? Good. I'm happy not all of you are raising your hands. Okay. But, okay, interestingly though, some of you who raised your hands, I happen to know that in those particular countries, in spite of that, there have been completely awesome campaigns that are making an impact on corruption. So that's the other side to it, that it is possible to have an impact. So Nena, and then we're going to move along.
I have a
Yeah?
question actually.
Yes.
With your case,
Yeah.
is this, because I'm lost in theoretical definition and concept, so is this still corruption or is it bribing? So then my question is, what's the difference? Because I think also strategies are very different to fight this case or to fight the corruption against environmental.
Absolutely, right.
I mean the
Yeah.
biggest,
Right.
the bigger scope. So can we just at one point clarify this so we can also see the strategy then?
That's a very good point, and actually, I'm skipping ahead, but thank you for the segue to this slide. I cut down all my slides by 50% so that it would not be a total PowerPoint presentation. But that's a very important point. But to get back to the second part of your question, Nena, it's like fighting corruption is like with nonviolent resistance and people power is like anything else. It's like each situation has its own context, and each situation will involve its own unique objectives, its own potentially unique demands, its own strategies that are derived out of that context and the objectives and the demands, and then its own set of tactics, nonviolent actions that people will take. So that's always going to depend. That will come out of the particular context and particular struggle of that particular kind of corruption. So hopefully what we learn from like this whole FSI and perhaps a little bit from this session is that what are some of the ways in which we can then develop our own efforts within our own contexts, given a framework about looking at corruption. So hopefully that should be then my goal for this session, that at least that overall framework is there. And I hope some of you have taken the book. I know some of you have taken the book. For those of you who have not taken the book, my book, it's the book, to me it's the book. Of course it's not the book for you, but because I don't know if there will be another book, but please, if you haven't taken a copy, please take it because you'll hear about it a little later. But let's just move along to what is corruption then. So I'd like to just give you 3 definitions. The first one is, at the top, is the Transparency International definition. It's the traditional definition, okay? I was not satisfied with that definition. The more I delved into how citizens fight corruption, the more I came to feel that we needed a different kind of definition for corruption, because how you define your problem will impact how you go about trying to address your problem. So I came up with the second definition, which was inspired by some others, and including an unpublished paper from the World Bank, and like somebody had talked about systems, and then Dr. Kurt Schock had talked about systems. And so this whole notion of systems started making sense to me when I was observing how people on the ground are fighting corruption. So I present to you the second definition. And the interesting thing about fighting corruption is that we can never, ever, ever capture all the corrupt people. We can never, ever, ever change the minds of all the corrupt people. We may be able to change some of their minds, but we can never change all of their minds. We can never ever stop all of them. So if we can't do that, what are we going to do? How are we going to do it? And we will never know who all of these people are, right? How can we know? Because most corruption happens outside of our view. That's why we have the notion of transparency. We hear about scandals, but that's just always the tip of the iceberg, and we never know what's below the water. So think about corruption then as a system of abuse of power. And that power, that abuse of power is not just for private gain. It's not just about people wanting to put some money in their pockets and build some nice houses or buy a villa in California or some a gorgeous townhouse in London for $50 million. It's also about collective gain for a group. It could be a clan, it could be a tribe, it could be even an ethnic group, it could be even a religious group, it could be all kinds of things, but it could be a group. And it also can be for political gain. You mentioned it yourself. Political parties, systems, electoral politics. We heard it before in the previous session with Alex Duvall, who was talking about these political systems. So often corruption is actually for parties to get money, to impact the election outcomes. So there are lots of different reasons for abusing power. And we have to remember that it's complex and it's intertwined, that this system is made up of relationships of people. And these people have established vested interests. They don't want to change the system because they're benefiting from it. They're getting these private, collective, and political gains from it. So what are they going to do? If there are efforts to stop them, are they just going to say, oh, well, we better stop now? What will they do? They'll resist, right. They'll fight back somehow. They'll thwart efforts. They'll put up obstacles. They can become even violent. They will harass, intimidate, repress. Depends on the context. So, and these relationships cut across different kinds of different parts of the society. Sometimes it can be vertical within an institution, like a ministry, or an educational institution, or something like that. But oftentimes it cuts across different sectors of society. And even somebody mentioned, I don't remember who mentioned this now, but somebody said that the money goes overseas. And this was a topic in our previous session. The money goes overseas, comes back, and goes or other resources go overseas and stuff like that. So it's actually can even be transnational, can be global. There's also another definition. And that's the third, that was developed by one of the greatest living Indian nonviolent leaders today. Her name is Aruna Roy. And she said it's the external manifestation of the denial of a right, an entitlement, a wage, a medicine. And in a way, you were sort of affirming that when you were talking about how this affects people. Because you were talking about real things that people are being denied or are losing or need and they're not getting. So that's like you could think of the bottom-up definition, the people-centered definition of corruption. So I we're going to see a movie in a couple minutes. And so I just want to just give you a little background on the book. And for actually to thank and acknowledge literally the millions of people who were involved in the campaigns and movements and community initiatives that I documented. So I did research to look for cases all over the world, and I found over 30 to a little bit more, and then I researched 16 cases and I put 12 in the book, so not all of them are in the book. I just want to acknowledge that anything I say today is a reflection of them and what they do and their brilliance and their creativity and their courage. And this book would not exist if it was not for them. So if you learn anything and if you derive any inspiration, it's because of the millions of people that have been involved in these efforts. Since this research, there are more and more and more things happening all the time. And it's not my life's purpose now to document every single thing that's happening. but just like a superficial effort to look to see what's been happening over the past 2 years alone. And there are nonviolent efforts organized going on all around the world for all different kinds of things. So in Armenia, for example, had to do with judicial issues, had to do with environment, state land that is protected, such as forests being illegally sold, or private developers are through corruption are buying the land. In Guatemala, did anyone hear of the Guatemalan Spring last year? Few people raising their hands. Imagine that in a system of complete dysfunction, of things that you described in your countries, entrenched corruption at all levels, you had a nonviolent campaign emerge started by one woman, Lucia Mendizabal, who was featured in our webinar last 2 months ago, and you can access it through ICNC. And they launched a campaign that literally, in taking a report that was conducted by an international human rights investigative body called CICIG, that's the acronym, they launched a campaign that forced the the president and the vice president to resign. Okay, that's a step. It's not the end of that's not the happy ending at the end of the book. That's like one chapter. And now there are lots of other chapters that are going to have to come along. But that was a major accomplishment. Nobody in Guatemala imagined that something like that could be possible. Macedonia, if there's time, I will tell you a little bit about the colorful revolution, which is going on right now, this minute. 67 days of constant protests in multiple cities and towns around the tiny country of Macedonia. And one of our colleagues here is from Macedonia herself. Oh, she's Alexandra. Okay, we'll grab her afterwards. Malaysia. Malaysia. A billion, roughly, approximately, well, 750 million. Now they're thinking over $1 billion from the state investment fund. Investment funds are the new thing now to fight poverty. The country takes money from its resources or somehow puts it into a big fund and says, this is going to go to fight poverty and to develop our country. Well, now I think now the estimate's 1.2 billion has disappeared. It's a lot of money. People are upset. Moldova, we have a Moldovan, there's Irina. $1 billion. $1 billion disappeared from the banks in Moldova. It's a tiny country. What's the population? 3 million. That's a neighborhood in some cities, right? Yes. Imagine if $1 billion disappeared from your banks. It's your money. People are upset. So, to leave you with 3 thoughts before we see our film, our special film of the day. What then are the dynamics to fight corruption with people power? Using this process of nonviolent resistance or civil resistance, whatever one wants to call it, but basically organized people raising their voices, using a variety of nonviolent tactics with clear objectives to achieve some goals. What are the dynamics? The first one is disruption. And that goes back to the definition of a system. If you have a system and you can't change everything in that system, what's your best hope initially in the short run? You have to disrupt that system in the short run. If you think of the civil rights movement, which spanned so many years, generations, and in a way it's still going on now with Black Lives Matter. What did people do in the beginning? You heard about the campaigns. They disrupted the system of segregation and institutionalized racism in the US. And that's how we need to think about fighting corruption. So this photo comes from the Philippines. I know Javier will know about the case. It's called the textbook count. Did you think that young people could be in the vanguard of fighting corruption? Does this look like your typical nonviolent tactic? No demonstration, no protest, huh? What are they doing? Counting books. They're counting textbooks. Well, there's a big campaign around that, and I mean, I could, spend a half an hour just telling you about that one campaign. But counting textbooks, that's disrupting the system of corruption in education in the Philippines. The other one is pressure. Ah, look at the photo. That name sounds familiar. Muhuri. Okay, so pressure, applying nonviolent pressure through the power of numbers. You've heard the whole week, and even in the earlier session today, that if one or two people try to do something, it's kind of hard. You can just swat them down. Same with corruption. You hear about anti-corruption reformers in governments who have to flee the country. It happened in Kenya. Happens in other countries. They have to leave the country because they get death threats. You hear about journalists, investigative journalists receiving threats, and even one in our room here, Mete, Azuela, and you hear, or they get killed. So one or two is easy to attack. So you need the power of numbers behind you. And so that's another dynamic for fighting corruption. You need people raising their collective voice over shared demands. Not 50 different demands, but something that everybody is on board with. And they're raising their voices to the corruptors or to the power holders. Not necessarily the corruptors, but the power holders. And so, again, what is the power of number? There's no magic number. So with Muhuri, if it's a whole community, that's a lot of people in that context. So you don't need 1 million necessarily. Depends what your goals are. Depends what your context is. In that context, that was like, what, 80%, 90% participation? That's like an amazing amount of people. And that creates social pressure. And social pressure can be very powerful. Even Dr. Kaplan was talking about it earlier. The social pressure that the communities have when they go as a community to try to engage with and negotiate with the rebel groups, with the armed groups. That also works sometimes with fighting corruption. And then the third is engagement. Winning people over, shifting their loyalties. That's something from an earlier session. Producing, quote, defections from the public, from governments, from the financial sector, from multilateral institutions, from international groupings. Because as we learned, fundamentally, not everyone is equally loyal or equally corrupt or equally wedded to, it can be an authoritarian regime or a corrupt system. People, oftentimes, especially in corrupt systems, oftentimes there are a lot of honest people who are stuck and they're caught. And they themselves don't know how to get out. And they themselves at least don't want to be corrupt. And at most, they may want to try to change things. But they don't know how to do it themselves because they're alone too. And again, when you're alone, you're vulnerable. When you have people behind you, you can be more powerful. Not in every case. So did you notice this says here 1.4 million call on the G8? Can you see that up there? So this was part of a global financial corruption campaign in, I think it was 2013, when the G8 met in Northern Ireland. And you'll get a tidbit of information about that later. So let's see a movie now. Enough of me talking, okay? What does this look like in real life? What we'll do now is we'll take some time to give you a chance to ask questions or share some comments with Hussein and Hassan, since we have people here who are very knowledgeable and are among the protagonists. And so I will just say one thing, that I love this film. I've seen it like 20 times, but there's one thing that really makes me irritated about it. And maybe that's my bias, but at the very end, you have an external actor, this lady, saying, we are very happy about our work, our efforts in Kenya. This was the lady from the Open Society Foundation. And I love them. This is an example of actually something would be very interesting to study, how Open Society Foundation actually enables grassroots mobilizing and organization and nonviolent action. even if they don't realize that that's what they're doing, because I don't think they understand that they're doing that. But anyway, Hussein is laughing. But the notion that we did it, and quite frankly, I don't think they did it. The community did it. And that's something, it's like symptomatic often, to me at least, of the international community somehow taking some of the credit for these kinds of things. But that's just my personal irritant. So I guess I have the privilege of standing here to like share my irritation. But other thing for you to know, it's very interesting. Soumya Kadambi, the woman from India who was one of the facilitators of the workshop, who also spoke at the end, she is a veteran of the Indian Right to Information movement. And that was a 10-year movement that started off in Rajasthan and spread nationally to pass right to information in legislation in India, which is one of the best in the entire world. And it is user-friendly, it is people-friendly. Because of this movement, it is something so simple and easy to use that one of the cases I documented in the book, the Fifth Pillar Movement in India, actually made part of their mission to take the Right to Information Act and empower citizens to actually use it to impact corruption that's hurting them in their daily lives. So with further ado, let's welcome Hussein and Hassan up. If you can sit there or you can come up, and why don't we, like, let's get see if anybody would like to ask you something. I know I have dozens of questions, but I don't want to ask you anything. I want to let our participants ask you questions or share observations about what they've experienced or have done that's similar. Kirsten has her hand up.
Firstly, I wanted to say thank you for the alternative definition of corruption, because Singapore is consistently one of the highest ranked countries for lack of corruption, and a lot of people often tell me I would have nothing to say about corruption, but if we use your definition of corruption, Singapore's ranking would drop like a rock, because we have so much gerrymandering, lack of information. So we have a president who's technically the head of state, although the prime minister is the political leader. So the president's job is to safeguard our reserves. And so he's meant to be like the last check before the country draws on either. One of our former presidents decided, well, if I'm the guard on the reserves, I want to know how much the reserve is. And so he asked, and he was told it would take 56 man-years to calculate and tell him, so they couldn't tell him. So essentially our presidents guard a reserve so they don't know how much it is. And they just,
and whose money is that ultimately?
It's our money.
It's
a
the
huge amount
country's,
of money.
the people's money.
And so we have a lot of things like, there's no Freedom of Information Act as well, that we don't know things, foreigners' visas can be revoked without any justification. There's no legal obligation to explain why, and that's happened to my family. All sorts of things can be done unilaterally without consultation. Every single election, they change the boundaries unilaterally with no explanation. So actually the question I wanted was, what was the process of getting the records? Because, like in Singapore, we also want to ask for information, and then an MP says there's no use about talking about transparency for transparency's sake. So we shouldn't have freedom of information because of the hassle. So what was the process of actually getting those records?
Do we need to give the mic to Hussein?
No, I'll pick them up.
Okay, so we'll take 3 questions? Okay, and then, 4 in this round. Okay, so Abidin?
You seem to be very, very good organized. How many staff do you have in your organization? Paid staff doing this job? How many people?
I saw Javier.
I also wish to thank you for your more complete definition of corruption. I think it's just more than a misuse of power, and you've captured the system. Well, I may not agree with the third definition, though it's not just deprivation of right. However, I also wish to share that in the Philippines, precisely because it is a system, that it has become so abstract that people have become exasperated, that there is no more anger, no more stimulus to start with to actually produce a people power tree. In fact, in the Philippines, if you use people power term, people will give you a rolling eyes reaction, not again. I mean, people are just so tired of people power. Because right now, it's a system, it's abstract. You don't know who your enemy is. Unlike before, we had Ferdinand Marcos, we had a dictator, we had a common public enemy number one. But now with that image gone, it's abstract. You don't know who you're fighting for. So what that has resulted to is that now we have a new president who is more Trump than Trump. He has won 16 million votes. And he is a mayor of an unknown remote town, which is a representation of the exasperation of people. And this president has promised violence. He said he will kill drug lords, he will kill criminals, he will kill corrupt officials. And as we talk right now, even before he takes his post June 30, a lot of people are already being killed. A colonel, military, drug lords, violating human rights. My friend who chairs the Commission on Human Rights was called publicly on TV as stupid. And he said, you don't go get in my way. I will kill people if I want to. That's before his inauguration, June 30. So what I'm saying is that this exasperation, this abstract presentation of corruption has resulted to 16 million votes for a violent president. So it's just a sharing, but at the same time, I'm so inspired by Muhuri. Thank you very much for your example, but at the same time, I really wish to also dissect, and maybe you can share. Have you also experienced exasperation? Like, what have you done to address exasperation?
Very good question. Why don't we start with those three, and then we'll take one more set of questions, and then I have some more surprises in store for you.
Maybe
So maybe one of you will take one question each or something?
sure, I can answer Xavier and
Okay.
then Abedin maybe.
However you want to divide, but there's three questions, so if
I
you
think,
want to take one, you can.
I think the important thing is, first I want to start with Xavier's question, and my voice is a bit lost. First, I would have to tell you this. In Kenya, people are fatigued. Generally, that fatigue is there. And when you ask people even for support in these processes, it becomes very difficult because the reason is the same people come back to power. The same people win elections. Same people are the ones who are holding those offices. So when you ask them and tell them, we need to really do these things or fight these, bad things, they tell you, we have done it, and it didn't work. It didn't really continue. So that fatigue is really, really there. And I'm sure in every country where there is corruption, you find those things where people tell you, why would I go vote? Because the same guy comes back to power. Why would I go do these things? Because the same person is still in power. So it doesn't, and those are the things now we're doing advocacy around, to tell people that we still have to change these systems. And it's only if we come out and participate that we can change those systems. So that fatigue is there. Aberdeen, Muhuri has about 28 staff. 28 staff. About 28 of us are the ones who do this work. And you find that we have 6 counties to cover. 6 counties are like, I think, it's like a distance between,
The coastline is about 300 kilometers.
it's about 300 kilometers that we cover, the coastal line. So we're still fatigued with, we have fewer staff, but because that is what we can get, then we'll have to work with those processes. So we're about to have about 28 staff. I think I leave the rest for Hussein or Fahad maybe.
Perhaps just to go to a question about the staffing. you know, as Hassan has said, that this work is tremendously tiresome, and you need to get people who are really to engage people who are really into that problem, so that they can come together. For example, this documentary, it's a constituency where predominantly of coastal nature, and we had to tell them that this is your money, not MP's money. So for them to come out, we have to use our staff and together with the community to come out and challenge this. And maybe Hussein can talk about accessing the information.
Sure. I think for us, and it's mainly what Shaska has talked about, we are all living in very desperate times. Many people have lost hope. Many people feel there's nothing that we can do about it. Impunity is everywhere. Presidents are changing constitutions, and there's very little that we can do about it. People are dying, but I think the biggest difference is in having that capacity to motivate the people, to let them know that actually you do not give in, because it's you who will suffer at the end. So I think much of the work that you do, or much of the work that we do in civil resistance and all that, people do actually feel that there is nothing much that can be done, and that's why it's called civil resistance. Civil resistance is not just about standing against the dictators, about standing against the oppressors, but it's about motivating the people to actually come out and demand for that change. And much of the work that is done, all this would not be possible if it was done by the staff members. If you are only counting on how many we are, how are we going to spread ourselves, it is not possible. You have to find means and ways of getting the public involved. So public awareness becomes extremely, extremely crucial. Even if Muhuri was to go to the office to ask for documentation, most probably they'll say, who are you? But if you go there with the masses, you are there with the hundreds of followers, and you're saying, you have to give us this information, or we will come and get it ourselves, then that becomes the pillar within which you rely on. So information, there are many ways of getting it. First of all, you have the insiders, you have people who are, you can work with, they can give that to you, you can use the law, you can go to court, but we've always felt whenever politicians see numbers, then they always respond. They know they've come here with 100, 200 people, they want this information. If they don't give out that information, then definitely there's something that they're hiding. So fighting that apathy, letting them know that you have to do something about your situation becomes the cardinal message.
Okay, 4 hands. 4 interventions. Okay, first Ahira, and then Okay.
I have a very short question. Really admire obviously, and on you. But the question is, I've seen that there is a committee that was established to investigate and to look into the CDF money. Many times, committees by the government are just another way to just cut the protests, cut the movement. Is this the case here? I'm asking, and if it's not the case here, how can you assure it's not the case? In Israel in 2011, there was a huge protest, like in the same time of the Arab Spring, all around. Around 1 million people came out to the street. The government declared, "You're right. We're going to do a big committee that's going to really look into all the things that we protest about." And 5 years later, everything is the same and even worse. So I'm asking you, how can you make sure that the government is just not trying to where you are?
Thank you. My question is about the community leaders that you work with, that they do the social audit. Do you pay them, or are they volunteer people? Because most of the time we are like grassroots organizations without any kind of funding, so how do you cooperate with them?
I saw 2 hands here. Okay, Busan, you had your, oh gosh, guys. Okay, who had their hands up before the two people? Okay, Susan, and then, Farai, okay. Okay, Susan, please.
Amazing work. So we have CDF in Nepal too. So I just wanted to learn from your experience about how do you see CDF? I mean, do you have philosophical problem with it and that it should be removed, or do you see procedural problem with it? So that's something I wanted to ask primarily.
And then, yes.
Okay, maybe it's similar to this question. First, confirm that the CDA funds are given to the member of parliament. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now, in my country, we get CDA funds, which were given to legislators, and it was embezzled. But in investigating that, we realized that it was unconstitutional to give them that money in the first place. Because there are 9 ministries. If you want to talk about building school blocks, there is the Ministry of Education. Roads, there is the Ministry of Transport which does that. So in the case of Kenya, does the Constitution give that provision that members of parliament must receive money to develop their own constituencies when they are line ministries which must be doing that work?
Let me just start. Okay, I want to start with yes, question. I think generally here what we have is like, first of all, the initial setup of the CDF fund was to reduce inequalities within societies that exist, because some of the societies were not accessing resources from the national level. So it has been a bit difficult. And most of the resources were tailored towards areas where were not marginalized. So the initial idea was a very brilliant idea according to us, because we thought like resources now will trickle down to communities at the grassroots level. That was one thing we said was useful, and there was an act created for that. But apparently those resources were later misused by the members of parliament. It was going to cronies, for their cronies. It was going to, projects that they think they have interest in. Those are the things they used to. And those are the things that, if you look at the film, were things that we were looking at. And sometimes some of the committees established by government is a bit difficult to really track, because most of them are people appointed from the national level, and it's a bit difficult for us to track specifically how they are going to engage with communities. Once in a while we do it, but it has been a bit a challenge. But apparently our constitution changed, and when our constitution changed, we emphasized that we needed devolution. Devolution meaning we needed resources to go back down to the communities at the lower grassroots. So we needed every area or every district or county to manage itself and manage its resources, so that the national government does not really, stifle other areas for resources. And the devolution came up. So when the devolution came up, we said it was necessary now to abolish the CDF, because if resources now are going directly to the counties, which are the grassroots, then there was no need of having the MPs. We call it the MPs money. There was no need of having the MPs money, the CDF, and that we needed to abolish. But the MPs really fought hard. I remember fought literally in Parliament that this must continue. I mean, like, they wanted that money to still continue, and they still have it anyway. It is still there because they are the ones who passed these laws, and it has been a big challenge. The worst of all now, when devolution came, similar to the CDF. I mean, like, a few cronies access it. There are ministries or departments in each. Some of the counties may do. Every county varies. There are counties that do very well with the CDF, with the devolution resources, but there are counties that are also terrible. So I think I'll leave it at that for Akia's question. The other question was from committee. Yeah, I wanted to ask about the paying of committees. Or communities, community members. none of those community members were paid. Yeah, none, literally none. So I think I need
and perhaps to pick it from there, paying of communities, you know, you need to motivate and tell them exactly what this really social audit means to them. Break it down on how developmental it will be to them. For example, for the case of the 4.8 secondary school that was said to be built in paper, but coming to the ground there was nothing, it was just a grass. Now we can say as an institution that that school is now registering for the national exam. They have 4 streams now. It was from that initiative that the MP realized, oh, I've eaten this money. So they came back and built that school, and now that school is registering for a national examination. Then, if you link that to society, then people will realize that this is something that we need to do it ourselves. And as it has been said, that from that initiative, from that social audit, that there are 7 other constituencies which join the board and do their social audits in their constituency.
Okay, I think maybe I'll start with your question. I think in governance, the principle of separation of powers is very clear. You have a judiciary, you have the executive, and you have the legislature, and they're supposed to check each other. It doesn't make sense for the legislature to undertake functions of the executive. So clearly, there is a constitutional issue there when it comes to giving legislators responsibilities that are naturally supposed to be, because then who checks them? Yeah, in many several years, you know, they would threaten the executive that if you don't release funds, we will not pass. I mean, if you don't release funds for CDF, we're not going to approve the budget allocations that you have. So there is constitutionally a big problem. And when we went to court, we actually challenged the constitutionality of the CDF Act itself, not even the details within it. You know, because in principle, it's just wrong. Yeah, and as we stand currently, the law was, you know, suspended. So it's not operational as we speak. I understand there were some debates yesterday in Parliament, but at least for now, it's not there. Follow-up committees, ASHA, definitely. That's how government always silences the people. Yes, there's a movement going on, okay, so we've established this. But 99% of the times, there's no result out of it. That's why, you know, at that time, people went to court, and, you know, because we didn't believe in that. These are the same members of parliament that are actually supposed to investigate themselves. It just doesn't make sense. And you had the chair of the CDF committee saying, people can't just walk into the office and ask to see, it's my money, why can't I? You know, that statement in itself shows the arrogance that some of our leaders have. They're saying, you can't just walk in. I don't know where that happens in the world. It's supposed to be that way. I should be able to access this information at any point in time. In terms of payment, definitely not. We don't pay them to do the work, but you need to facilitate them. You have to realize that these are people from, you know, very poor. Just giving you that whole week to stay there with you, they're already giving up many other issues. You know, they live like from hand to mouth. They have to survive just, you know, by working. So at least you facilitate their movements. If you have to go to this school, then you know, you help them to get to that school, to investigate what's happening. You make copies of the documents for them so that they can understand what's happening. But in an ideal situation, even that should not be there. But then you also have to look at what is realistic for them to be able to do. And where you can help, of course, you always help.
I don't have a question, just an offer to help. We have done a lot on the Devolution and the Right to Information Act across the 4 provinces and the center, and we have covered quite a lot of demand side in the last 7 to 8 years. So we are there to help you if you need anything. Now we have started working on the supply side as well, so we can be helping you. Sure.
Thank you. So let's thank our one last surprise for you. Before I get to that surprise, I've got 5 minutes. Do you think I can get a little bit more time and it's not going to be me talking? Okay, thanks. This is sort of like
I don't think so.
pictures. We have a photo at 12:30?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Then let's have our two other specialty people come down, Mete and David. And, while they're coming down, I'm going to show you 1 minute of something while they're walking down here. So you heard about monitoring as a tactic. There are lots of other tactics, right? You can look in my book to look at all the tactics. But I want to show you a video clip, 1 minute of a video clip. Because monitoring is not a formula. Monitoring is a tactic, and there are an infinite varieties of a monitoring tactic. So I'm going to show you 1 minute from Afghanistan. Community monitoring in Afghanistan, very different from Kenya, and yet the principle, the tactic is the same. It's a community-driven effort to monitor reconstruction and development projects. So 1 minute.
این سرک با طول 13.3 کیلومتر و عرض 4 متر به یک شرکت اضافی.
Get a sense. This is very different. There's a chapter in the book on Afghanistan, so you can read all about how they do monitoring. And we could call that a grassroots civic initiative involving people power. So I have here now Mete and David, and they're going to each take a very short time to just tell you a little bit about what drives them and what they do. And I don't think we'll have time for questions, unfortunately, because we have to go to the group picture. But you can talk to them during lunch and during the rest of the day and share with them. So,
well, I'm glad that I prepared it because we don't have enough time. But we start our organization in Mexico. It is called Stop Playing Dumb because it wanted to include not only a struggle against corruption from the citizens to the authorities, but also among the citizens. And we started in 2008 when Mexico was already rated as one of the most corrupt countries in the world, and there was not citizen participation mechanism, so all the Mexicans were limited just to vote. Which is just one example of many acts of corruption committed by our politicians. We chose an act of congressman corruption since we don't have any political preferences. All the congressmen were our target, regardless of the political party to which they belong. The first campaign launched that is in the book was called, I don't know if the translation is okay, but it is more or less congressmen with a long tail and citizens with a short one. And we pushed them to stop to use public money for their Christmas bonus. They used to receive $500,000 each this Christmas, and it was a success. $100,000 each congressman. Yes. And it was a successful campaign since we stopped the following legislature using public money for this Christmas bonus. We continue monitoring the congressman and impulse a campaign in which 500 citizens adopted 500 congressmen in order to report if the lawmakers were accountable on issues that were general interest. In partnership with other organizations, we also were pushing for a political reform because we need more different mechanisms of political participation. So we now have independent candidates, citizenship law initiatives, and popular consultation. It took us 3-4 years more to achieve this. And we also work in civic education campaigns and promote for peaceful coexistence in schools because the increasing bullying and violent culture is spurring more of the new generations. Teachers have detected that kids in public or private school started to play as they were narco-traffic leaders or serial killers. So drug trafficking culture has become very aspirational in our society. From 2008 until today, Mexico dropped 31 places in the corruption rating according to the Corruption Perception Index of International Transparency. In 2012, we returned to be governed by the party which monopolized the power for almost 80 years. And the current president, Enrique Peña Nieto, has even been accused
by the press with very well-supported research, of fundraising his campaign with money from the Juarez cartel. This cartel is one of the many crime groups that dominated drug trade in Mexico, and they are responsible at least for 1,000 murders in the last years. Last year we worked on a proposal for economical reform to gradually reduce the use of cash, and increase the use of electronic money transfer. Unfortunately, this project has not had enough citizen support, but now we are designing a new campaign to link the citizens with public interest, which means that since we are the investors because we pay taxes, we are the owners of the country. And at least, but certainly not least, we are very worried about the walls that Republican candidate of the United States put in front of all over the world regarding Mexico. But it is also important to break the walls of fear and indifference of Mexican citizens that will not stand up against corruption, and to start an important struggle for human rights in our country. Thank you, Major. Thank you.
I'll try to tell myself.
Yeah, please come stand up.
Oh, okay. So we have two questions, Maite and I, to answer. So why would we do this? It's the first one. I think all of us at some point in time had this moment in which we were faced with a situation or a question which literally changed our lives, correct? So mine was when I was 17 years old and I was in high school. And there was this joke that I would run for president of the Students' Council, and the next day this guy who's even like younger than us comes and offers us money so that we wouldn't run. If you're 17 years old and you're offering money to another person just as young as you are, there's something really wrong with that. So that was, I guess, that ignite moment for me in anti-corruption. So that's why when we started the movement, which is now an organization called Reacción Paraguay, Reaction Paraguay, we asked this fundamental question of how can a country say it is fighting corruption if its next generation is being educated by corrupt people? And that really drove us forward, that paradox. How are we going to fight against this? And what was fascinating, since I just have like a minute left now and I'm timing, what was so fascinating about this movement, and I'm very proud to share it, is the team has never gone above the average age of 21. We started this when I was 17, 8 years ago. I'm 25 now. The NGO has become a national reference for grassroots mobilization to monitor things like a national development fund. What you've heard here, 80% of that, the similarity, is what is being done in Paraguay. And our grassroots monitoring system is just very similar to theirs. With the difference perhaps that we only have 3 staff. 2 of them are girls, 19 years old, who are coordinating regional-wise monitoring exercises. And they're feminists, by the way. I'm very proud of that. So 2. And so right now, the last point I want to make, since 2 minutes are over, just the focus on how do we motivate youth and how we engage them in participation, which is something that I've seen we're all being, how do you promote engagement? What we have learned is really that you have to create platforms for them. It's just creating a space where they can come and not be related to a political party, and then letting them take protagonism for this. And that changes in context, but that was our experience, and that's just point 1.